I'm not sure if it's a sign of my emotional growth or where books are these nowadays, but we've looked at a lot of poetry books lately, and they haven't been horrible. Maybe it's been the evolution of poetry, or just the greater way that poetry can be used to tell stories. Perhaps that's it. Ken is a great example of this. Ken, Rooted in Hope. Let's not confuse Ken with that classic Patrick Swayze movie. This is totally different. This is it's a very personal book from author Carol Boston Weatherford, and it's really powerful, and it sounds so cliche as to say it's a powerful book, but it really is a strong book because it's about slavery, but it's about slavery from the way it was looked at from a variety of different sources, told in a novel form of poetry, of prose, and it's told out of order in a non-linear fashion. So some of the poems might take place earlier in the days of slavery, some would take place later, and it's utterly fascinating because it's a book that really has that all ages feel. Here's the example for this. On the press release, or if you look at the website for Ken, Rooted in Hope, you see that it's good or it's appropriate for ages 10 and up. And you're like, well, I'll give this to my 10-year-old and they'll have a field day with it. That may not be the case, because I was at a college bookstore yesterday and Ken was in one of their best new releases category. And I'm like, oh, sweet, it is. So I told one of the book people there, I'm like, hey, it is a great book, and we had a little chat about it. But if you give this book to a 10-year-old and say, hey, read it by yourself, they're not going to get the power from it. They're not going to get the passion. They're not really going to understand it. They'll be able to read it, and they'll understand all the words, but they will not understand the power and the meaning behind a lot of the poems. And that's the thing, partially because it's told out of order. It's told in a non-synchronous manner, where, and in addition to being out of order non-synchronously, from different subject matters. So you have one from maybe the slave owners, like the Lloyds, some from the slaves themselves, some from the people that vended to them. It's really fascinating because it's an overall picture of slavery. It doesn't pull any punches, and it's a great book of poetry that really makes you think. I was equating this best to a friend of mine, saying you could read this by yourself if you're 10, you could. But more appropriately, if you're in 5th or 6th grade, it's a book that you want to read to your classes or have them read one by one and then talk about it the next day, because it's a tough book to read, not because it uses big words, but because you got to think about the subject matter. So you 6th and 7th graders, yeah, you could read it, but you got to think about it to really enjoy it, because you're not reading it just to get to the end of it. You're reading it to kind of dig into the passion, to dig into the story as to what they might have been thinking, because it reads like nonfiction. Even though it's fiction, it has elements of nonfiction, because Weatherford did a lot of research for it, and it shows, because it's a really strong, powerful book. It's like nothing we've read recently, and it's poetry, which flies in the face of everything that we haven't liked, but we really enjoyed this one. So go figure. If you're teaching a class to middle school kids, this is going to be great for them. High school kids, you'll love it. Even you college kids. We never talk about college kids. This is great for them. So it's an all-ages book for those middle school kids all the way up. Hey, you upper elementary school kids, you'll get it and you'll understand it. But you may want to read this with somebody else. Read it in class, just to dig into the power. It's Ken, Rooted in Hope. It's a very strong poetry book for ages 10 and up.